decision, or was that a collective decision? Or
Well, all I can say about that is, I spoke with Gary for quite a bit for this book, and I felt he was pretty much of a straight shooter. I mean, he wasn't trying to puff himself up. He was sort of self-deprecating and self-aware enough. And his thing, which feels believable to me, is that it just wasn't happening. It wasn't making anybody particularly happy. And after a while, he sort of just like, well, I don't want to feel like I'm putting people through something.
Right.
I want the band to be good, so maybe it's time for me to make an exit too. I don't know if he was pushed out. I just think that they were never able to create a follow-up record that everybody was happy with, and so it just became evident that this thing wasn't working.
Did either one of you hear any of that material?
No, I haven't.
Yeah?
I heard some of it.
Yeah? What was it like?
Well, it was interesting. Gary shared some of it with me, and he shared me a couple of tunes that were really interesting because part of it was he was like, well, you have to hear this, because when the song's finished, if you ever wanted to hear what Ed and Al sounded like just going to town, here's a performance for you.
Okay.
He played it for me. It was definitely, a much more straight ahead Van Halen sound.
Okay.
The track that I heard.
Okay.
And then it went off into this 4-minute jam that was unbelievable with just Ed and Alex going to town, like being Cream, if you will.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There's no mention of Mitch Malloy and that whole situation. The singer the band chose and then ignored in between David Lee Roth and Gary. Was there any material on this, or what do you make of that whole situation?
Really, Mitch was like a blip. Mitch has a great story. But really when it comes right down to the Van Halen timeline, it was like a nanosecond. Not to downplay what happened and everything like that, but it really, as far as Ed's concerned, it was just, they went from doing these songs, with Dave, and then it was Gary, and Mitch might have been sort of a consideration, but once Gary came into the picture, it was Gary from that point.
And have any of you heard the early 2000 recordings with Dave?
No, I haven't either. I've heard about them a lot. I know John Five and everything, and he would talk about them, but he was under the non-disclosure to play me any of the material.
Okay,
so.
Gotcha. So now, in terms of 2004, being that Ed was in the condition he was in 2004, should they have really put him on the road? It seems clear that he was in a difficult state, but everybody seemed to want their piece of the pie. Do you think that his bad behavior on that tour was an act of rebellion from the hangers-on?
Brad can probably answer a little bit better because he saw a little bit more of Ed around that time. I came just right after that back into the picture with Ed.
Okay.
But it was done for all the wrong reasons. It was a tour that was a bad idea from the beginning.
Well, yeah, it was a money tour.
The timing was bad. Ed was in a horrible, horrible state. Yeah, it was just a bad idea. I don't know if Ed was rebelling so much as he was just struggling.
Yeah.
He had issues to work out. Brad has a great story about the whole samurai head knot. How Ed would kind of disappear off stage for a while and come back with his head tied up, and it was just all of a sudden like, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that seemed to be an on-again, off-again tour, depending on what night you hit it.
Right. The way you guys describe it in the book is, everyone thought maybe it'd be a good idea to have Ed make music and get him on the road and get him back in that group because that's what he responded to best. And it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback, but judging by the way everyone describes him like that at the time, it's just amazing that nobody looked at him and said, I don't know if it's a good idea to put this guy on the road. I mean, they all said like Ed was having trouble and stuff like that, but nobody seemed to take a step back and say, maybe we should cancel the tour. And I hate to say this, but I feel like they all had dollar signs in their head. Yeah. And they were like, he'll make it. Not a problem.
I know, it seems that way. I mean, when you saw him, he seemed fragile just like watching him. And from an insurance standpoint, it's kind of rough to put someone out. That was a pretty long tour, and they were going to even extend it, and they decided not to for obvious reasons. But it was really sort of a wild time. But Brad, what do you make of it?
Look, the most important person here was probably Alex. Alex was going to have to help make that decision. And I don't think it was for the dollar signs. I think when somebody close to you and your family is struggling with issues, you think that somehow if you stay close to them, you'll be able to save them. And Ed probably needed that professional help. I think they made a bad decision. I mean, I think Ed was he was pretty proud of those 3 songs.
Yes, he was. He was very proud, yeah.
And actually, they were really good. The playing on it is phenomenal. And I actually saw the band rehearse during that period in L.A. I was in a rehearsal, and Ed was like freaking nailing the new songs. Wow. He didn't really care about the older stuff so much.
No, of course.
So I think he was enthusiastic about that. I think Alex somehow felt that if he kept him close, that he could help him. I just think all around it was a bad decision. But, Ed really ended up not getting the help that he needed for even quite a few years after that. I mean, it was a long process, to sort of get him there. Some of it had to do with Janie, his second wife, who was tough as nails, and also Ed seeing his son growing up. And I don't think it sounds corny. You're not, when you're talking about Ed, it's interesting because I know a lot of professional musicians, obviously working in guitar world for so many years, and they're thinking about their careers and they're being calculating in sort of one way or the other. Ed had Al to be sort of calculating, but still Ed had most of the power in the band. So he did what he wanted to, when he wanted to, and it was hard to get him to do anything other than that.
That's true.
And it took him, he needed to wake up. And, oh my God, the terrible lessons he had to go through in order to wake up. Battling all the illness and dealing with his, with his drinking and God knows what else. But Janie worked hard with him. And again, Wolfgang too. They both deserve a hell of a lot of credit. When I saw Ed, I'm trying to think of when it was. It was like a few years before he passed. I was so happy. I couldn't believe it because I'd seen him in that pit. And to see him back, like just the old Ed that I knew, it was really extraordinary. And all you out there, all the people out in Van Halen land, I mean, it really was thrilling to see Ed back, not to get all mushy about it.
No, of course. I mean, absolutely. And, especially on the 2015 tour, he seemed very happy to, almost be doing a victory lap in a way,
Yes.
I mean, I'd never seen him so relaxed.
He was happy enough to actually say that he thought that David Lee Roth was brilliant.
Yeah, that's the truth. That's the truth. That's the next question I had was, do you think that they ever had some resolve between the two of them, even though they're very different people and they come from very different places? Do you think that as older men, these guys are at the time, I guess, early 60s, Ed, passing 65, but this is around that time, 2015. Do you think that there was at least some sort of union or understanding or as older, wiser men?
What I saw with Ed, with the relationship with him and Dave, was that they finally learned to respect each other's space. It was very much a professional relationship. They didn't pal around and, have dinner together or anything like that. I mean, as everybody knows about the tour, Dave showed up and did the show and took his own bus afterwards. And they didn't mingle. Even a lot of a different kind of truth was done separately.
And Henson and
but I think there was a mutual respect between the two for their contributions.
Mm-hmm.
I think personality-wise, they clashed. Instead of pouring fuel on the fire, they had come to just accept this is the way things are,
Yeah.
And Dave is this guy, and he's crazy, and he takes off to Japan, and he does these wild trips and goes all over the place, and Ed likes to hang out at 5150 and be with his family. And they were fine with the arrangement, and there was really, they could have gone on working for years, I think, that way and been absolutely fine. And I think, as much as anything, I think Ed was a little bit frustrated there, last formal interview I did with him where he just, said, I'm ready to go do another record, but, I've got 3 other people.
Yeah,
that's
true.
That have to agree to do that. And I think a big part of that was Dave was just like, hey, my bank account's refreshed and I'm taking off to Tokyo and see you guys. You know?
Dave also pretty warmly embraced Wolf, if you notice that. He was very supportive of Wolf.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dave's a smart guy.
Yeah.
And I think he saw basically what Wolf was doing for Ed. And I think he just saw this infusion of this kind of, hey, there's a young guy in the band to kind of kick our butts a bit and wake us up. And, we're not a bunch of old men going out, with walkers and whatever. We've got this youthful energy here. And I think he kind of dug that.
Yeah.
I always felt that Dave was on a short leash because now that he was finally back in Van Halen, he didn't want to rock the boat too much.
It was kind of actually, they both were kind of on eggshells, I think, with each other. I think they knew that they had a good thing going, and let's not push each other too hard in one direction. I would catch Ed being very careful about what he said about Dave, and he was complimentary of him, but I think at the same time there was just, let's not mess up a good thing we got going here, There was respect in both directions.
One thing interesting, Wolfgang recently said there weren't any leftovers from A Different Kind of Truth. However, in your book, Ed said we ended up recording demos for 35 songs. All of those songs were ready to go, and we were able to play them all. What do you make of that?
What I make of that is that they were demos, that they weren't finished songs.
Okay.
It may have been instrumental parts, and there was no Dave lyrics. There was no Dave vocal recordings.
Okay.
That's probably what it was. It was probably like we had done this, and they probably had done a bunch more of those great unreleased songs that we know from the demos and the bootlegs and everything. They probably had at least a good dozen of those on the back burner, and I think part of it was out of respect for Ed. If it wasn't 100% finished and didn't have a stamp of approval, then it wasn't really done in Ed's book.
Now, your book also addresses fans longing for the mysterious whereabouts of the Van Halen Oakland 1981 show. Do you think this will finally put it to rest? Eddie answers the question very clearly in your book. Says, people ask why we've never released the rest of the 1981 Oakland show that we recorded on video. The reason is because we only recorded 3 songs, Unchained, hear about it later, So This Is Love. We actually filmed those 3 songs on 2 different nights. The bottom line is we can't ever release the whole Oakland show because we didn't film or record the whole show. So do you think that'll finally put it to rest?
I would hope that would put it to rest, and it really actually it makes good sense when you consider I've worked with film crews in the past with other jobs that I've done, and they're expensive.
Highly expensive, yeah.
Man, when you get into a film crew, or video crew shooting a whole show and all the labor involved and all the editing involved and everything like that, it gets to be a pretty expensive prospect. And you look at the 3 songs they were the 3 Fair Warning songs that we talked about earlier, the singles, basically.
Yep.
And that's what they were used for. They were used for promotion. MTV was brand new, or just coming around the bend. I mean, it was basically just starting to happen at that period. And this is their way of doing that. And I mean, there was a whole video explosion that was going on. It just makes sense that they would just record those 3 songs. Unfortunately, it would be awesome if there was a professionally produced video of the whole show, but I seriously doubt that there was any more than those 3 songs.
Now, you guys have both been to 5150, and you've seen the vault, quote unquote. What do you think will become of it?
I would hope something comes out of there. I mean, I know it's got to be a major task, and it's got to be emotional for Alex to go through that stuff. And I could only imagine, just wading through such a vast amount of material to figure out what to do. I would wish personally that they would do it sooner than later, because this is one of those things, as time passes, as much as we love Ed, it's going to be that much harder to keep him in people's memories.
No, yeah, that's
and I
true.
think we need to just keep him alive,
Right.
and the family needs to realize that we just need to, even if it's just a song here and there, this is what Ed needs, for people to remember just how talented the guy was, his contributions, and just, Ed was such a perfectionist. I'm afraid that voice is probably just hanging over them of like, oh, it's not finished yet. It's not done yet. I can do that better. It needs this, it needs that. And they're probably worried about not fulfilling his wishes by putting this stuff out. But, at the same time, I still would just love as much as anything to hear those demos, those 25 demos from Warner Brothers, given the proper treatment. That would just be be incredible. I think
Yeah.
that'd be a great place to start.
Yeah.
That album is a landmark. It's one of the all-time best debut albums ever recorded.
Sure.
And just to hear how that was coming together. I just look back at 1977. That was just a magical year.
Mm-hmm.
Everything came together for them. I've listened to every possible bootleg I can find out there of live performances.
Sure.
Just trying to hear how his tapping came together. You really don't start to hear it really come in his solos until like really